Siaya, 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 siaya.
This is Steve Zeltzer with Workweek, and today we're talking with Phakamile Majola, who is the press representative of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. They recently had a national workers' strike of machinery workers, and this struggle was important of the metal workers of South Africa. It was one of the largest strikes in South Africa of 150,000 workers. And we're going to talk to her about what happened in this strike and other issues facing the working class in South Africa. So welcome to our show.
Good day, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
So why don't we first talk about the economic conditions that led to the strike in South Africa of your union?
Indeed. So what you had in South Africa was an engineering strike that took place in the engineering sector. It's a sector in South Africa where the manufacturing of steel and engineering products and all other related industries exists. So NUMSA, like many other companies in engineering, is a member of the Metals, Engineering and Industries Bargaining Council. The Metals, Engineering and Industries Bargaining Council is the bargaining council under which all engineering companies, workers are organized. And it represents over 9,000 companies and over 300,000 workers. NUMSA represents about 150,000 of those workers. We are the biggest trade union in South Africa and the biggest trade union in the metals and engineering industry. Now, the strike that we embarked on began on the 15th of October, and it took place against a backdrop of extreme poverty, unemployment, and general discontent by the working class at high food prices and just the general cost of living, which has really skyrocketed in the last 2 years since the arrival of the COVID-19 virus. This has been made worse by the many lockdowns that we have had. South Africa has had several lockdowns. Some of them have been very, very hard lockdowns. In fact, we are known for having the most stringent form of lockdowns under COVID. And those lockdowns have meant that companies would not be operating. And while they're not operating, it means that people are not working and they're not earning an income. Lockdowns are not uncommon. They were occurring under COVID all over the world. In South Africa, however, there were serious challenges which were created by the lockdown. Our government promised to pay out temporary relief funds to workers during those lockdowns. Unfortunately, most of the time, specifically in engineering, there were many, many workers who did not get that temporary payment. So by the time that workers took a decision to embark on strike action this year on the 15th of October, they had already endured many months of lockdowns, many months of non-payment. And then when we came to negotiating this year, which was because this was the year when we needed to renew the agreement in engineering, we found that the employers were not willing to meet us halfway. And it was really that frustration and that anger tied up with the socioeconomic conditions that workers were facing that sparked this national strike. And the strike went on for approximately 3 weeks.
And what were the demands of the strike?
The demands were very straightforward. It was in line with the wage talks that we were embarking on at that time, where we were demanding a meaningful wage increase over a 3-year period. So we were demanding 8% wage increase across the board for workers, and employers were only offering 4%. And it was really the decision by employers to offer only 4% against the backdrop of the suffering that I've just explained, that got workers so angry that they took a decision to embark on a national strike. And the purpose of the strike really was to shift employers in a direction where they would offer more, because up until the point we actually declared strike action, they were completely adamant that they were not willing to budge. They would not negotiate further than the 4.4% that was on the table. And our members were saying, look, we've already gone through so much, and we cannot possibly be expected to just accept what they're telling us. Let's hit them where it hurts by stopping all production in the hope that we can get more in terms of an increase.
And are these companies profitable?
Well, when you look at the global performance of this sector, the steel sector, reports do suggest that globally steel has performed very well. The reports that we were relying on as well was the fact that this is an industry that globally is, according to global reports, actually on the mend in terms of having been affected by COVID. They've, as of April this year, they were making a lot of profits, certainly in iron ore. However, the employers have argued that whilst globally that might be the case, in South Africa, they have not really reaped the benefits of that profit run. This is their argument. They also claim that the recent unrest that we experienced in July, where members of the working class basically, there was some uprisings that happened in South Africa. There was some looting that happened in many companies in South Africa as a result of anger and frustration at the arrest of the former president. That for them, they felt had a very negative impact on the domestic economy and on their performance in South Africa, and they felt that they could not afford the increase. However, we feel, and we continue to believe, that they could, because when we went on strike, within days, they came to us with an offer of 6%. And to us, that was evidence that had they just placed that on the table, perhaps we would not have needed to go on strike in the first place. We eventually settled on 6% on minimums, and the strike is now over. So for us, really, it is obviously that the downside of strike action is, for us, is that for every day that workers are on strike, they are denied their pay. So for 3 weeks, workers were not paid in order to achieve that 6%. But had we not gone on strike, workers would have had to settle for 4%. And overall, our members were largely satisfied with the result which was achieved with the settlement.
And also the role of SAFTU, the trade union federation that you're in, they threatened a general strike. What kind of solidarity did your members have on the picket line?
We experienced a lot of solidarity, and we really must express support and appreciation to SAFTU and its affiliates for expressing so much support for us during the time that we were on strike. Not just in the manner of that they supported us in the media, but also for some of them coming out to picket with us. There were times when the General Secretary of SAFTU addressed workers in parts of Ekurhuleni, so that was really, really appreciated. At the same time, we got a lot of international support and solidarity messages from sister unions, for example, Industrial, Igi Metall, many unions and progressive formations sent messages of solidarity and support. We got a lot of media coverage as well for the strike. So really, it was very positive, particularly because the message of workers came out very, very strongly during this period.
And of course, workers around the world are under attack. And one of the issues facing the world working class is the issue of temporary work and contract labor. Can you talk about the growth of contract labor in South Africa and Southern Africa, and how that's affecting unionized workers and the working class as a whole?
Indeed, we have a very serious problem with contract labor, in the sense that what it does is it undermines the power of unions. It undermines the power and the solidarity that workers have on the workplace. So even, for example, during this engineering strike, there were some companies that were undermining the strike by bringing in scab labor, bringing in temporary labor as a means to sort of, weaken the strength of the strike in various companies. overall in South Africa, we as a union, as NUMSA, we have launched a massive campaign against labor brokers. We've gone as far as fighting this at the Constitutional Court. We even won a landmark judgment in 2018, which made it very clear that workers after 3 months must be absorbed and made permanent in their workplaces. However, as you know, capital always finds ways in order to improve and empower itself. And we have seen many companies circumventing that legislation through the way, clever sort of rebranding themselves or renaming themselves. They're no longer labor brokers, they're now service providers. And then these contracts continue in perpetuity beyond the 3 months that the law allows. So it really is a huge challenge. The government has really empowered the capitalists and companies to really have a lot of freedom on this issue. And as long as we've got the existence of labor brokers, as long as we have contracts that are allowed to exist, it undermines the gains that workers make, because of the fact that it means that a strike action, those workers are then used as a way to undermine the unity of the strike and the strength of the strike on the shop floor.
And this issue of contract labor, under apartheid, large numbers of workers were contract workers, temporary workers in a contract relationship. And also in the mines, you've had a struggle recently in political assassinations of trade union leaders, organizers who are fighting contract labor. Why don't you talk about what's been going on in the platinum mines and why your union organizers are being murdered in the minefields?
Yes, we had a very serious situation playing itself out. I think it was around August. Yes, it was around August, when Comrade Malibongwe Mdazo, who was a NUMSA organizer, was unfortunately assassinated, and it happened very publicly. He was shot as he was exiting the CCMA offices, and he was an organizer who's really was committed to organizing workers under NUMSA and fighting against this abuse of workers by contractors. At Implats no longer depends on its permanent employees for production. That is Impala Platinum. It's a huge platinum mining company in South Africa. And they now have replaced, I think if I'm not mistaken, it's about 70% of their workforce now is provided by contract labor. So when NUMSA basically organized these workers and got these workers to join the union in their thousands, their biggest demand was around their conditions. There are serious challenges for workers who work under contractors. Contractors cut corners. They for example, they don't adhere to basic health and safety principles. We've had complaints, for example, around how workers don't have access to proper safety equipment. They're not perhaps properly paid. They don't have benefits in terms of their payments and their packages, many problems. And so workers, when in this process of being recruited and working in that sector, there was a time when there was I think it was a 3-week strike, unprotected strike that took place in that area. More than 6,000 workers went on strike. It was a huge strike, and it had a huge impact on Impala Platinum. And we believe that Mdazo was murdered because of the prominent role that he plays in organizing workers in that area. We would not be surprised if some of the contract companies had something to do with his killing, because they really resented his role in organizing workers. They believed he was responsible for the major strike that took place earlier in the year. And it's a very painful situation. We are waiting for the police to conclude with their investigations on this issue. But for us as a trade union, we continue to mourn the loss of Comrade Mdazo, who was killed in this very, very brutal manner because of his work.
And of course, these contractors, if you had in the contract system, they would be put out of business. So they have a financial interest in destroying any union organizing effort to make them employees of the company.
Absolutely. In the mining belt where Mdazo was organizing, there is unfortunately a long history of violence in the Northwest. Even before Malibong Mdazo was murdered, other organizers in other unions historically had been killed just for being involved in organizing workers in that particular platinum belt. So this is why we say that we would not be surprised if some of the contract companies themselves would have had a hand in his murder. There certainly is a financial interest for them if workers are not organized, because as long as unions are not involved there, they can continue to exploit workers the way that they've been exploiting workers, and they do so with absolute impunity.
And what does that mean for COVID and fighting COVID and getting PPE and protection for these workers in the mine?
Well, it means that we have to work twice as hard in making sure that mine workers are protected, in making sure that companies do what the law demands that they have to do, in ensuring that workers are safe. What has helped hugely is the arrival of the vaccine. As NUMSA, we really had been pushing very strongly for the vaccinations to be made available. And we are very thankful that finally, anybody who wants to vaccinate can vaccinate, whether it's Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, they can get a vaccination and it's free. And we hope that as many people as possible take up these vaccinations so that we don't continue to lose people through deaths from this virus. We have lost so many people because of COVID-19. We have seen already, for those that have been vaccinated, certainly amongst health workers, we've seen a serious reduction in South Africa once people get vaccinated.
And the issue of testing, is there a mass protocol for testing? Because even if you are vaccinated, you can still get the COVID and also transmit it.
Absolutely. So it just depends on the mining companies. There are some mining companies that have regimes around testing. Because of mining being the kind of industry that it is, where you've got hundreds of workers working in shafts, working underground, which are not very ventilated spaces. This is why vaccination, specifically in mining, is so important, and of course in the health sector as well. But overall, absolutely, the facts are precisely that. Even if you are vaccinated, it doesn't mean that you can't catch COVID. It just means that you might not get as sick, you might not go to hospital, you might not die, but it does not make you invulnerable to catching this virus. So it does mean that other protocols must be maintained, such as sanitizing, masking, ventilating, and it's absolutely important that workplaces maintain those standards so that there are no outbreaks, and people will not get infected.
And having no union means you're less likely to get the proper protection.
Absolutely. One of the things we picked up last year very quickly was how so many companies were violating basic COVID-19 protocols. Part of that may have also been because of ignorance. I think a lot of companies were only just starting to understand how this virus operates, understand how it works. Some of them were hesitant about spending money on sanitizers, but I mean, the science has proven that the sanitizers are effective, that deep cleaning is effective, that wearing a mask prevents spreading of the vaccine, spreading of the virus. So we have seen a much better adherence to those protocols now. especially because in South Africa, even now, even if you're vaccinated, you can't go into any public space without a mask or without submitting yourself to mandatory sanitizing at the door. Certainly, if you are accessing a mall or a shop or any kind of retail space, that is the law in our country. So that has helped a lot with keeping standards, health and safety standards at a particular level.
And the issue of privatization, I know that the Freedom Program, that there was an effort in the transformation to have nationalize the wealth and resources. That hasn't happened. There's been privatization under the ANC government. How has that privatization affected your members and the working class of South Africa?
What we're seeing in South Africa is specifically in state-owned entities or companies which are owned by the state, there is massive privatization taking place. So in South Africa, we've got a national airline called SAA, which is state-owned. We've got a national provider of electricity generation called Escom. We've also got PRASA, which provides rail services, that's also state-owned, and various other state-owned companies. Another one is an arms company called Denel. These were all entities that used to exist under the apartheid government. They were entities created by the apartheid government in order to empower the white working class. Since 1994, when the ANC government took over, the ANC government has been promoting neoliberal macroeconomic policies. And in the last 2 years, it's been doing everything possible to privatize some of these state-owned companies. If it's not privatizing them, it is doing away with standard benefits and conditions that used to exist that now no longer exist, or it's working to get rid of them. And this is having a huge impact. Just to use Escom as an example, you and I had to cancel.
What is Escom?
Escom is the electricity supplier.
I see. Okay.
And we've been experiencing rolling blackouts in South Africa. And this is having an impact on our economy because we cannot guarantee electricity generation. And our inability to guarantee electricity generation means that companies are unable to do their work. So we've had massive problems because of that. But also it has meant, and it also means that there is restructuring that is taking place in some of these state-owned companies, which is going to result in thousands of jobs being lost. South African Airways, the airline that I was telling you about earlier, has already, as a result of this restructuring process, retrenched over 3,000 workers. It's just recently started flying again, and it's flying with only about 1,000 employees on its books. At the same time, Escom, the electricity generator, is looking to retrench about 6,000 workers. At the same time, they've brought in renewable energy companies, but these are privately owned renewable energy companies, and government's renewable energy program is going to result in the closure of power stations, which will mean over 100,000 jobs lost. So, you know, it's not a really good story to tell as far as privatization is concerned. But certainly what we are seeing is that our government is doing everything possible to enable the private sector to make money, but it's done very little to cushion workers and their families during all of these changes that are happening in all of these companies.
And of course, this privatization has led to a deterioration of transportation and other services for the public under private ownership. Also, there's what has happened on the docks. Transnet, I understand, is trying to privatize the Port of Durban. Has this affected the transportation industry?
Well, this definitely will affect the transportation industry once it has been affected. Certainly, it will affect it in terms of jobs, we believe, but also we believe it will probably affect it in terms of the quality of service. We've already seen an access. If you consider, for example, what's happening in Escom, where as they are introducing the private sector through the renewable energy program into generating electricity, the cost of electricity has skyrocketed, and it's going to continue to skyrocket. Escom has to spend more on electricity now because of the involvement of private players through the renewable energy independent REIPPs. But this renewable energy independent, this renewable energy program, which has been brought in through the private sector, is detrimental for us as a nation. And so what's happening at Escom, we believe will happen even at Transnet as well. Basically what government is trying to do is they just want the private sector to take over these entities, but they're not even doing it in a way that is helping workers and their families. They're not even doing it in a way that makes sure that even if we have to accept that privatization is being implemented, you have to at least make sure that as you do it, that workers don't suffer, whether it's through job cuts or through changes in benefits and conditions. And our government isn't doing anything to cushion workers in that regard. So we've just seen massive job losses with no real support. And the private sector is just going to benefit from those processes.
And President Ramaphosa used to be a leader of the Mine Workers Union. Many former union officials in South Africa in the fight against apartheid have been integrated into the capitalist class. Is that a political problem for the working class when you have these trade union leaders who are now running these corporations in South Africa, or partners or managers of these corporations?
It's a huge problem. It's not just the trade union leadership, it's the ANC political elite. The lack of transformation in the mining sector, for example, is a result of the fact that so many members of the ANC elite, the leadership, are themselves sitting on the boards of many mining companies in South Africa. So you will, for example, know of the Marikana massacre that happened in 2012, where 34 mine workers were gunned down by South African police at Lonmin mines when they were demanding higher wages. They were just demanding improved conditions. It was an unlawful strike that went on for a period of time, and their biggest demand was for a living wage. And what was at the heart of that protest by mine workers were the shocking living conditions that Black mine workers in this country are still subjected to, even in post-apartheid South Africa. The fact that they are migrant laborers, the fact that they earn peanuts, the fact that they live in shocking living conditions with no water, no provision of electricity, they live like animals. And so these were workers who decided that they were sick of making demands through the NUM, which was failing to change their lives as a trade union, and they embarked on the strike, and the government responded the way they responded, with extreme violence. So we have seen a very little transformation on the ground in the ordinary lives of Black people, because the political elite has gone out of its way to enrich itself at the expense of the masses.
And the issue of these are issues, contract labor, privatization, that are all over, not just in South Africa, but Southern Africa and Namibia. Do you see the need to unite workers both in Africa and internationally about these attacks on contract labor?
Working class solidarity is crucial if we're going to make any progress when it comes to improving the lives of workers and their families. Certainly in sub-Saharan Africa, we've got to do that, because we are experiencing situations where companies are moving their businesses out of South Africa because of the fact that they don't like the labor regime, they don't like all of the militancy of the unions and the demands that they've made in order for the benefit of workers. So they feel that if they get out of South Africa, and go to other countries that are on the continent whose labor laws perhaps are not as stringent, then perhaps they can do as they please. And this is why we need to have very strong relationships with unions, not just in South Africa, but in the region, so that we can help each other on these struggles. I'm sure Americans are also aware, for example, that in Eswatini, also formerly known as Swaziland, there's huge unrest and uprisings going on there because the working class is fed up with the monarchy. And as NUMSA, we have been very supportive of the struggles of the working class in that country. And that's what international solidarity is supposed to achieve. It's supposed to ensure that workers across borders support each other on common struggles, so that we can ensure that we are able to make gains through that type of solidarity and support.
And in the United States, in Alabama, Warrior Met Coal, United Mine Workers, coal miners have been on strike for over 7 months. Some have been run down by scabs. There is a labor strike wave growing in the United States of workers, John Deere manufacturing workers, Kellogg workers. It seems like there is a growing strike wave in the United States, and this perhaps is developing internationally as workers around the world are getting fed up with their conditions and is exacerbated by COVID.
COVID really showed the working class that they got the raw end of the stick. It's been so difficult, and you can I mean, I've actually been watching what's been happening with the John Deere strikes and the Kellogg strike, and the response to by the media. It's been very interesting for me because I understand certainly with the John Deere strike, for example, it was higher earning workers that made a decision that they were unhappy with their conditions. And there was always this assumption that, oh, well, if you were earning well, you're not going to complain. But the reality is that ordinary workers have been deeply affected by COVID-19. They've been forced into retreating into their homes. They see how capital has not only bounced back from the virus, but has in some cases been making rampant profits even at this time. Meanwhile, the lifestyles for ordinary workers and their families have gone down the drain. The cost of living has increased, the cost of basic goods and services has increased. And this seems to be the case not just in South Africa, but globally, where workers are just saying, look, enough is enough. We can see that no matter what the conditions are, capital always does well. At what point do we as workers get a real piece of the pie? And that, as I understand, is the demand from John Deere workers. They're not just interested in an increase, they actually want a piece of the profits, which they are entitled to. Workers are entitled to the profits that companies make. Without them, there would be no profits. So really, this is a message to capital all over the world that the working class is not going to just sit back anymore and accept crumbs. They're going to make demands, and they've got every right to make more demands, because they can see how the system has really been sort of engineered against them.
And we're talking with Phakamile Majola. Phakamile, the NUMSA has had a position that workers really should run the country, run society, run the industry, and run the world. How do you see that taking place? I mean, it seems like in this COVID pandemic, workers have gotten a short end of the stick. It's even worse for the working class. How do you and NUMSA see the development of socialism for the working class really to take control?
You know, at the end of the day, it has to be we have to be fighting for a future where the working class is the one that is driving its own agenda for its own benefit. I think ordinary workers and their families have seen that for too long. They've handed over their power to politicians in the hopes that politicians would act in their interests and take decisions to improve their lives. But certainly in South Africa, we've learned very painfully that politicians can betray you and betray your hopes. We had hopes that the ANC, which was part of the liberation movement, once they get into government, they would basically take all of the issues that we had, all the demands that we had for free education, all the demands that we had for land redistribution, all the demands that we had for the nationalization of land and the minerals for the benefit of society, that they would actually take that on board and implement those types of policies. However, the ANC has allowed itself to be captured by the interests of capital and private interests. And from the time that it's been in power, all it's done is to enable the power of corporate capital against ordinary workers. So if we want to see a real change, it means that workers have to unite and start to push socialist policies and socialist ideologies, so that at the end of the day, we can actually see and start to experience the benefits of what freedom really is and what democracy really is. Black people didn't just want apartheid to end so that they could sit at the same restaurant as white people. They wanted genuine equality. They wanted a better life, they wanted to be free from squalor and a life of informal settlements and poverty. And it's so sad that more than 20 years after the end of apartheid, Black people are still fighting for the same things that they were fighting for under apartheid. That's why the demand has to be much more than democracy under the guise of corporate capitalism. The demand has to be socialism.
And the corruption of in Namibia, for example, the judicial system, the labor arbitration system seems to have been corrupted. The miners at the Rosine mine, uranium mine in Namibia, were fired. The leadership of the Mine Workers Union in Namibia 9 leaders were fired. It seems like, and just yesterday, the labor arbitration for their case was dismissed indefinitely. It seems like this corruption in the judicial system and the legal system is actually preventing workers from having any adjudication of their cases. You see that as a danger today for the working class in South Africa as well, that the corruption within the judicial system and labor structure is going to mean that they can't resolve their problems through those means.
Capital is consolidating, and it's consolidating at all levels, even within the judiciary. And you're right to use that as an example of what's happening. It's not just there. I mean, we're experiencing the same thing here in South Africa, where the labor court, we would say, is quite right-wing in terms of some of the decisions that it's handed down, where the court aligns itself very strongly with capital at the expense of workers. And I think it's really part of what the capitalist system is doing. It's sort of to fight back against what labor and what workers are trying to do to fight for better conditions. And this is why we just have to do more. It's a very, very difficult situation to be in, because as unions, you might lose, you might not be able to succeed directly with your employer, but you go to court with the hope that the court will at least level the playing field, so that on some level you might be able to score a victory in the interests and in order to protect workers. But it's very, very sad when you see courts taking positions to protect capital instead of to protect the interests of the public in general. And that is the problem with the capitalist system generally, is that all its structures are geared to strengthen the power of the capitalist machinery. It will, of course, require, and again, this is why solidarity becomes something that is very essential as a weapon to fight, because if you're going to lose in that space, it kind of limits you in terms of what avenues are available to you in order to resolve issues. This is why you'll see a lot more unrest, you'll see a lot more strike action. If workers feel like the courts are not spaces where they can find the kind of resolution that they need, they will embark on strike. And so it's a very, very difficult position that trade unions now find themselves in.
And last, there have been international actions in South Korea. On October the 20th, the KCTU launched a general strike. One of the demands for equality against contract labor and against union busting repression. What do you think of their action of fighting for a general strike for equality for all? It seems pretty radical, actually.
And I think, whatever trade unions must do in order to improve the lives of society as a whole, they should do it. Because at the end of the day, Steve, we can't sit back and pretend we're not members of society. We don't see the problems that are in play, that are affecting our communities. The struggles sometimes of workers will go beyond what is in the workplace and extend into areas that speak, as you say, that speak about general equality. South African apartheid was brought down in part precisely because organized labor would strike persistently and consistently in the workplace, not just for improved rights for workers in that sort of narrow context, but a lot of those strikes were human rights strikes. They were strikes for an end to apartheid. There were strikes to demand equality. So what is the best way to force capital to act in the right way? Hit it where it hurts, right? And that means to stop production. And obviously KCTU has recognized that the only way we're going to get the Korean government to listen to us on these core issues is to stop production on the capitalist side of things. So all power to them, and as NUMSA, we have in the past definitely supported KCTU, and we continue to do so in their struggle.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Phakamile Majola. She is the press representative of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, talking about the struggle of the engineering workers and all workers in South Africa. So thanks for joining us on Work Week.
Thank you for having me, Steve, and have a good day.